first speaker today is Mark Angel. He is the Chief Technology Officer for Renaissance Learning. He has had a long and prestigious career in the technology sector, most recently as GM and VP of Multi-Channel Solutions for Nuance Communications. He's also been an entrepreneur. To begin our conversation today, Mark is going to share a presentation about teachers and their role as the most important consumers of data. He will share insights from Renaissance Learning's field research about what teachers need to make the most of the data they're given. He will help us understand the value of transforming data into valid visual insights that make information more accessible and more usable for teachers. So I present to you Mark Angel.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Maria. So as Maria said, I want to lead off by talking about Renaissance's learning over many years about the need to go beyond valid data and to create visualizations that are vivid and that transform data into information. At Renaissance, we've learned that teachers and educators need more than the raw bits and bytes of data to succeed. They need to be able to see data in new ways and in new forms that bring home the information in a way that is deeply actionable. Many moons ago, my wife and I used to take trips down to Mexico. And after a number of years of hearing the kids complain, we started to bring home t-shirts like this. It's fair to say that even as 42 states have adopted growth models and data-driven models, that most teachers feel the same way about the data initiatives that we're delivering. In truth, as much as we are investing in data and information, very little of the benefit is flowing back into the classroom. And it's a key that policy becomes a foundation to create an environment, to create the conditions in which data literacy can really happen. And what I'd like to talk about this morning is what we've learned about how data literacy can actually form and take place when policy starts to respect the core requirements for data literacy. What we found through all of our research is that it's important to think about data literacy in a new way. We've been going through a digital revolution for about 40 years now. And over the course of that time, almost every walk of knowledge workers has moved from a world where they made ad hoc decisions into a world where their decisions are profoundly influenced and mostly shaped by the data at their fingertips. And what we've learned is doctors have gone through that transformation, as Wall Street traders have gone through that transformation, as people in every field of knowledge consumption have gone through that transformation, is that in fact, data literacy begins by understanding that it's not about data, it's about the ability to synthesize and transform data into information. Because when you do that, that's the prelude to genuine insight. And insight is the precondition for taking action. So we think data literacy starts with a recognition of this kind of model. And it proceeds, and this slide is courtesy of Dr. Damien Bettenbetter at the Center for Assessment. He's found in his research and work around data that data literacy proceeds from an understanding that it's all about the skills required to go from information to insight to thinking about data from two very different perspectives. On the one hand, data can be used as a mirror. We can use it to understand ourselves better, to look backwards in time, to really appreciate what's worked and what hasn't worked. But on the flip side, data can be a window. It can be the way that we can see the future, that we can look outwards and understand things that might be, use it to predict, to look forward in time. And what we've learned is that data literacy requires us to be able to use data in both of those dimensions. Success means looking back, it means looking forward. If we only use data to look forward, we can't test what's actually worked and we can't get better. But if we spend too much time using data as a mirror, data starts to become our enemy, right? It starts to become the way that we get judged. And that's what's happened a lot in the education world. Data's become all too often a weapon and not an instrument for really looking forward. So at Renaissance, we have a remarkable opportunity to collect data. We do more assessment in the K-12 world than anyone. We do hundreds and hundreds of millions of touch points with kids to understand what they have learned and comprehended about their reading. And we work with enormous numbers of teachers across the country and, in fact, in other countries now. And in the course of both collecting that data and working with educators, we do a lot of validation. We sit with teachers, we do surveys, we watch them in the classroom. And we found pretty fundamentally that there are 4 big barriers to data literacy for educators. And I want to talk about those barriers and some of the research we've done, and maybe some of the implications for policy. Right? So the biggest barrier, not too surprising, you talk to most folks who try to use educational data, it's just confusing. And this is typically the problem that most people have with data. What we found is that paradoxically, the key to making data less confusing is to provide even more data. There was a really interesting challenge that Maya Lin set out to conquer around how to make the data about the Vietnam War understandable. Right? She had to deal with this really amazing problem of creating meaning around 50,000 soldiers dying. How do you present that data in a way that people can really comprehend? And she started with the idea that you want to see that data in the big sweep of time, right? You look at the monument and you know immediately, how long, how incredibly time consumption the war took. But when you get a little closer, you start to see the data in a different way, right? You see those names kind of ebbing and flowing, time periods when there's a lot, time periods when there's fewer. The data sort of takes shape in a new way as you get closer. Then when you get really close up, you see the detail, right? You realize that each of those names represents a father or a son, a real person who lost their life. And it's in that combination, the ability to see the long sweep, the mid, and the short sweep, that creates real resonance, right? That brings home what that data really means, that has the emotional impact that allows us to have a core understanding. We think the same kind of idea applies to the way that we use all kinds of data, but especially educational data. In our world, we present this amazing thing, this number, and it's the number that a student scores on a test. And it's like this granite block. It's a 402, or it's a 680, or it's 1,010. And we expect that from that sort of single view, people can extract meaning and understanding. But in truth, right, for that data to come home, we need to give parents and students and teachers even more data. So what if we surround that data with kind of the history of the student's growth? We show their career leading up to that number. What you see in these arrows is their growth percentile over time, where yellow is average and green is good. And now you can see that 402 sort of in the context of the student's progression from the 2nd grade up to the 5th grade. And what if we don't use data just as a mirror and look backwards, but we use it as a window to look forwards, and we project based on how all the other students in the United States that have scored 402, how they progress through the next year, right? We see down at the bottom in the red, that's how some of the lower percentiles of students have gone. Up in the green, some of the better ones. And now we have a way to say, okay, maybe we can understand how this student is likely to do this year and what history has taught us about what we can expect going forward. And then what if we actually use that to make more predictions, and we put that data in the context of benchmarks and comparisons so that we actually understand that 402 in relationship to expected performance, right? And it's through this addition of detail, this accumulation of additional information, that we can create genuine literacy and genuine understanding about that initial raw number. And this is, we think, an important lesson, not just for those of us who try to present data back to educators, but for those of us who think about policy, right? That we need to get beyond the place where we deliver simple outcomes and focus on how to put that information in a broader context. The second thing we hear in our validations, the second kind of fundamental complaint that educators have about data, is that even when they can understand it, they're overwhelmed by it, right? There's just so much of it. It's clutter. It's just really difficult to separate the forest from the trees. So this is a visualization from Ed Tufte. Some of you may have encountered his work. He's probably the guru of gurus about thinking around how you make data vivid and visual so that it's understandable. And he presents this example around some information conveyance about how people signal pilots. When you look at that, it's pretty hard to pick out the forest from the trees. And we found, as Tufte has found, that the key to dealing with clutter is to layer and separate, right? To emphasize those things that really matter and put everything else in the background, right? To take away all that black bordering, make the shape of the person stand out. And then above the shape of the person, to use color to emphasize the movement and other things that are there. We struggled for years at Renaissance to convey some pretty simple information about how does a teacher know if a student has actually mastered a particular skill. And we presented that information, lots of different kinds of tables and lots of different kinds of ways. And in our research, it was always scored as really cluttered and hard to understand. And gradually we got to the place where our visualizations used this kind of separation with the blue check marks to indicate mastery, and this kind of separation of information to really emphasize what was important about those skills. And now we see in our validations that this is understandable, right? Because the important stuff stands out. And one of the things that we really believe is that data literacy requires data creators to make a lot of tough choices about what really matters and what does not. So the third kind of complaint we hear is maybe a little less obvious, right? If we had to guess what people would say about why it's tough to consume data, we'd probably guess, oh, it's confusing and it's overwhelming. But the third thing we hear in our validations is that more often than not, a big challenge is that the data is undifferentiated. And what teachers mean by that, what we've come to understand about that, is that all too often data is presented out of a context in which it has interpretability, right? That there's no real way to look at it and make any sense of it. So this is actually a pretty esoteric little chart. It shows in the red dots the birthplaces of poets in China. It's probably fair to say that I didn't know anything about the birthplaces of poets in China. Probably most of you don't. And you look at that pile of data and information, and you still don't know anything much about the birthplaces of China poets. But if I add some additional context, even without knowing much, we can begin to see and visualize patterns, right? We can see over time that birthplaces move from the north down to the south, and they moved towards the coast, and that more poets were born, and that they tended to cluster around the urban areas. We've learned to call this concept small multiples, right? This is also an idea from Ed Tufte. And the notion is that when you present similar information in comparative ways, it starts to take on meaning, right? Literacy can start to emerge. And this actually, from our perspective, is related to a core piece of the policy debate. Many of us at Renaissance have had occasion to sit with state legislators and other people who set policy, and they're often in love with standards, with the idea that what we want is a way to assess or collect data in one single way. And that's a fundamental denial of this idea, right? We need to be able to see data from different perspectives. We need to have comparison. We need to bring together as much different kind of data as we can to really get richness. So what we've learned is that when we can present education data in this small multiple kind of form, insight emerges. Probably a little hard for you to see, but this is a set of comparative data for some students in a class against three metrics: a comprehension metric, are they taking quizzes and understanding, a quantity metric, how much are they reading, and a nonfiction metric, basically saying are they getting balance in their reading and living up to the Common Core idea of doing a lot of nonfiction work. And each of those color blocks is a student. And the teacher can simply sort of look at the different students and see how they compare on these different metrics. And if you look at Brad's sort of a yellow student in the middle, what you see right away in looking at this is that Brad's reading a fair bit. He's even reading a lot of nonfiction on a comparative basis, but he's not comprehending, right? His quiz scores are low. And then you look at a different student like Mariah, and you're seeing that Mariah is comprehending what she's reading, and she's reading an okay amount of nonfiction, but her general quantity of reading is low. Now, you could look at the underlying data, and it would not be apparent how to understand those comparisons. But when you see the data in these small multiples, right, insight kind of leaps out at you. It's the ability to compare different students and to look from one of these blocks to the next that allows literacy to emerge. The final complaint that we hear from teachers should probably not be too surprising. For an incredible number of good reasons, we in the education world focus a lot on data validity, right? And that's as it should be. There's nothing worse than putting unreliable data into the mix of our students and futures. But at the same time, sometimes the emphasis on validity encourages us towards boredom, right? To presenting data in really flat and uninspired ways. And what we see is that sucks the life out of data, right? It keeps it from becoming information. It keeps it from becoming really useful. So when you think about how do people consume data, truth be told, we apply the same skills around understanding data that we use in the general world. The human brain has been wired for tens and tens of thousands of years to understand color and to understand space, right? That's the world we live in. It's a colorful, spatial world, and we interpret through that prism. But often our instinct is to put data in this very, very flat, two-dimensional world where color goes away, space goes away, and when those things go away, our interest goes away, our engagement goes away. So what we've learned to do is to treat color as information. This is a visualization of a teacher's class in terms of how students are progressing with assignments. And you can see them moving left to right and the use of colors to conclusion, but you see right away that our eyes are drawn. We can't avoid looking at that red triangle, because that's the way our brain is wired up. So we've learned that data literacy requires us to organize data for the brain instead of requiring the teacher's brain to organize the data, right? And this is, I think, a fundamental lesson as we contemplate policy. We need to make sure that our policies around data respect the fact that people are not natural data consumers, and we have to go out of our way to get data in the right form. So if you take these kind of four fundamental learnings that we've had from all of our validation and interaction with teachers, we think there's some important kind of lessons, not just for us in terms of presenting screens and building software and creating assessments, but for everyone in the education community who contemplates how we drive our world up the learning curve of data literacy. We need to make sure the data is presented from the big picture to the micro detail in the same kind of sweep as we see data in the War Memorial. We need to make sure that we are religiously disciplined about identifying the key information and focusing on that and separating the important from the trivial. We need to absolutely respect the power of multiple views and multiple data sources and diversity in understanding data. And finally, we need to make sure that we're balanced in our use of data in terms of not just using it to judge, but also as an aid to driving future improvement. So we're pretty confident and convinced, as you'd expect, that the power of data cannot be denied in the classroom any more than it could be denied in the healthcare world or the world of Wall Street or in any other of the professions that have defined the advance of knowledge workers. At the end of the day, educators will become data ninjas, but we can speed that process along with the right combination of technology and policy. So with that.